Hello and welcome back to another edition of Press Pass here at GNet TV. My name is Andrew McKeever. I'm the news director here at GNet, and it's my pleasure to be with you today. Today is August 31st, 2017. We're glad to have you with us. We're also glad to have with us here in the studio two journalists who write for the Bennington Banner, Berkshire Eagle, and the Vermont Digger as well. Jim Therian is I guess you'd say, a veteran, seasoned reporter from the Bennington County and Berkshire County areas. And also pleased to have with us Ed Damon, who is also a reporter who writes for the Banner and the Eagle. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here today and taking the time out to
Thank you.
come and talk a little bit about some of the big stories we've all been following and covering over the past month or so. And I guess today is a truly auspicious one because it just goes to show that timing is indeed everything. It's really great to have Jim with us today because, as many of you know, this week, appearing both in the Banner and in Vermont Digger, Jim has a 5-part series on the PFOA situation that bubbled up a year ago, January 2016, in North Bennington, and earlier even than that in Hoosick Falls. And Jim, one of the great things about the series is you finally got me to understand how to pronounce PFOA.
Well, that's good.
Perfluorooctanoic acid.
Hey, that's good. I don't have to do it, right?
Okay.
Just PFOA is good.
But yeah, I think we'll stick with PFOA. So a very serious situation where emissions from a plant that made Teflon coating in North Bennington, seeped into the groundwater and the soil, and the state, got on that, and there's been a lot of back and forth on that. Most recently, we had to stay some kind of an agreement between Saint-Gobain, the company that owns that site, which has been out of action since, I think, 2002, making a $20 million settlement. I know that's not the end of this story. We're still going to have more to come on this. But I guess what fascinated me when I was reading this, going through the installments you've had so far, what gave you the idea for the series? I mean, you've been writing about this and covering it for over a year now. What made you think, it's time to take the real deep dive into this one?
Actually, this was something Mike Polhamus at Vermont Digger had been working on. He was doing a story that pretty much was summed up in the second installment, and that is what the state did to respond to citizen complaints during the late 90s, early 2000s about emissions there and odors, and it was a mixed response. That's the best way you could describe it. A lot of people said that they were totally ignored because it was a company that employed 80, 90 people and paid pretty well then, and this was during the Dean administration mostly. But Mike is working on this, and he was having trouble finishing it off because he's up in Montpelier, and Ian Galloway, the publisher editor at Vermont Digger, asked me to start to work on it too. And then we talked some more, and then we had a meeting up there, and it was 2 stories. I wanted to do the history of PFOA use and Teflon use in the area, mostly with ChemFab. But then suddenly we had 5 stories. So now we have 5 stories that we've gone through. Coming up on the 4th one now. Should be out on Vermont Digger today. But from that original idea, it kind of expanded, and I think it shows the kind of the story of what industrial pollution can do to an area, and it just is incredible health effects. Destroys your wells. It in this case destroyed probably hundreds of wells. People drank it for years, didn't know that they had it, and they have high levels in their blood, and it can cause cancers and other conditions. I think there were about 5 or 6 that were identified out in the mid-Ohio Valley, where DuPont made Teflon, which PFOA is associated with. There was a big study associated with a lawsuit out there, a medical study that lasted almost 10 years, 65,000 people, and those were 5 or 6 diseases or conditions that were associated with it. So this is the kind of problem that can develop, and people, either they ignore it or there's no recognition of how bad it's gotten. And it's been since 2002 that the plant in North Bennington has been closed. They also had one on Northside Drive in Bennington, ChemFab. The same people, the principals in another company, War and Wire Company, operated in Pownell from the late 40s until the mid 60s, when they sold that plant to General Cable, and then formed ChemFab in Bennington in 1968. They all involve coating fabrics with with Teflon, which includes it PFOA, and then you bake it dry. And what happens is you have fumes. It's up over 600 degrees in the process, so the fumes go out. And the state considers the fumes and the exhaust to be the principal reason for spreading it around such a wide area. More than testing was done in wells at least 1.5 miles, and now they're expanding that out a little bit more in some areas. And they detected in wells out that far, I guess. And the state has had a tremendous response in Vermont, not a little bit different in New York, and Ed can talk about that because he's covered it.
Yeah, well, I know, Ed, you covered meetings over in Hoosick Falls back in 2015, I guess it would have been, when the evidence first began to surface that there was some issues with the drinking water. What were those meetings like? What's the tenor of the tone? Were people agitated, or were local officials on it?
Sure.
Or?
I think one of the first meetings that I covered was around maybe November of 15, and I had recently started at the Banner. I had moved up from the Berkshire Eagle, and so I sort of walked into the situation maybe right in the middle, and I think it was around the first, right before Saint-Gobain, which owns and operates a factory in McCaffrey Street in Hoosick Falls, the village in eastern Rensselaer County, right before or around the same time that they committed to installing a water filtration system, a giant, I'm going to say Brita filter, basically to remove PFOA from the municipal water supply. And I think it was about maybe a couple weeks later when I had a source call me kind of out of the blue and said, "Hey, did you see this this note from the EPA that said residents should not drink or cook with the municipal water?" And I said, "No, I haven't. I haven't heard this from anyone. I haven't heard this from any local official. I haven't heard this from the mayor. I haven't heard this from even anyone who lived there, because no one knew about it." So I think the question was, what was the response? How was the response different?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's accepted that it was a delayed response.
They didn't
I think the
appreciate the
response was
seriousness of
slower.
it initially?
I
or?
don't think they understood. Or maybe they didn't want to alarm the public.
Right.
But not telling the public something is, I think, going
Or
to make
again,
that's
perhaps-
alarming. I think.
Weren't they
to find out.
talking? Weren't they also talking with Saint-Gobain about what to do about it before that? I thought I saw that somewhere.
I think
and
there
they
were
hadn't
talks.
hadn't
I think
revealed
there were
it to the
talks.
public or something.
Yeah, that's
until late.
You're right.
But in Vermont, it was within one day of they tested some wells in North Bennington because of what's
Yep.
going on over there, and they within one day of having the first test come back positive, there was a great overwhelming response by the Schumelin administration, and Scott administration has followed through on that. They've had people down here doing a lot of testing, periodic meetings to tell people what's going on, give them updates, testing of wells, and negotiating with the company to try to get water lines extended. See, the water systems in Bennington, North Bennington, are not affected, as in Hoosick Falls,
Right.
which has a well system, I think.
They have a system of 3 wells
That's the
that is
problem,
about 500 yards away from the McCaffrey Street plant that has
Wow.
been operating since maybe I think early 50s and 60s, might be 62.
Wow.
And
Ground
when we're
zero,
talking
huh?
about when we're talking about emissions
much.
Yeah.
from the smokestacks over in Hoosick Falls, one thing that a lot of people have told me is in the 70s they had to put in these filters to capture it from the smokestacks. PFOA was used in the process of getting the Teflon to stick to things, and it was a byproduct
Oh, yeah.
that wasn't used. So they would put in these filters to capture it so it wasn't spread out into the air, but then they'd take the filters out to the parking lot, hose off the filters, and the water would just run down to where, I think in about 2005, they put this system of 3 wells that serves about 4,500 public water customers in the village.
That's remarkable, because I suppose you can half understand maybe 40 or 50 years ago, the connection between some of the
Right.
stuff and the environmental damage it might cause wasn't as clearly understood, but boy, by 2005, you would have thought that would have been
Well,
pretty
and that
obvious.
PFOA, I think the Teflon, I think, has been around for decades anyway, and it's had PFOA for a long time. And the problem of it getting into groundwater wasn't recognized until, I think, late 90s, early 2000s in the Midwest, where they had a Teflon factory, which pumped out a lot more. That's DuPont. And when they were sued, the documents were obtained to show that there was some knowledge that that this stuff was not good from workers at the plants and things like that. And that led to a study that was approved. 65,000 people were involved. Then there were lawsuits, individual lawsuits that the company lost over medical conditions, I guess. And now then you had a settlement early this year of $670 million in a class action suit for 3,500 people. So this came about over time. The lawsuit took forever, of course, and the study only in the the past decade, right, the middle of the last decade, the study results came in. So there was a lot going on with Teflon and PFOA, and it was all over, everywhere, Teflon pans. There's a lot of waterproofing products and some of the other
waterproof clothing.
Yeah, all kinds of, like, I don't want to say any names, brand names, but they, it was spread everywhere, and it's estimated, I think, that 99.7% of the population has some PFOA to register in their blood at a very low level for most people, but the people who were tested in Bennington, at a North Bennington area in Bennington, at 5 times higher, I think, than the national average. Let's put it that way. It's the kind of thing that stays in the water. It gets in the groundwater, and because of its properties, it does not just
doesn't
dilute.
dissolve
It's
and-
not like some pollutants go away much faster, and this could last. Some people will say forever in some form. So it's a huge problem.
And a story that is not going to be going away
No,
anytime
I
soon.
don't think
No,
so.
I don't think so
A lot
either.
more yet to come. We could probably spend the entire show talking about all the various ramifications of all of this, but got a few other pieces to move on to.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and, and Jim, one of the ones that you've been writing about also in the banner is an initiative in Pownell. Sounds kind of similar to what we had here in Manchester 4 years ago with Manchester 2020
Exactly.
initiative, a sort of community visit, I guess. The Council on Rural Development
Vermont Council.
wants to do a study in Pownell about how to balance climate change, jobs, and the economy.
Well, they've been doing these types of community visits. They've done 50 or more in Vermont. They did one before in Pownell, which was about 10 years ago, and one in Bennington, and one in Manchester. But this is the first one under it's a Climate Communities initiative, and they started it with Pownell. Pownell put in the best application, they said, so they chose them and Middlebury for the first year. So Pownell started it off, and it was the same exact format where they come in, they get people to volunteer to help organize meetings, and they suggest projects that volunteers could do, and then they'll bring in experts, people from the state government. In this case, it's about climate economy, how to prepare and better prepare your community for climate change. Now, I think maybe that's part of the problem, that there was a reaction to that.
Well, doesn't Pownell already have a big solar farm down at the old
Well,
former
sure,
racetrack?
sure,
And I would have thought that would have been kind of a natural fit, right?
Well, yeah, it is for a lot of people, and a lot of people are definitely afraid of, well, they said it right out, big government and people from upstate and Montpelier
Telling us what to do.
telling us what to do. That was definitely a quote, a hidden agenda, and it has to do with preparing yourself for the opportunities for coming up because of climate change. Say you wanted to install a charger station for electric cars, or develop bike paths or things like that.
Mhm.
So they ask for a lot of ideas in the first meeting, community-wide meeting, and then they whittle that down to 5 or 6, because a lot of them are repetitive or could be combined, and then the people who come to the next meeting vote on it. They've had about 100 to 120 people at the different meetings. There was a lot of controversy over how the voting was going and how these projects were decided upon, and the supporters are saying that it's all volunteer projects. It's not asking yet for any kind of aid or anything, but I think there was a big fear that there would be a big solar company or wind company trying to take advantage of this somehow.
There's been a lot of pushback.
And there was a lot of fear about smart growth, which is basically, I think, concentrating development into central cores of which a lot of communities are
Already
definitely
trying
doing.
to do,
In
right?
fact, Pownell's town plan and zoning mentions trying to do that. And if you know Pownell, you know that they've had not smart growth in the past. So there's two sides to this, and they've had rapid growth right after the racetrack opened in the early
Early
60s,
yeah.
and they had no zoning. So things were just put in at will, just about. So I think there's a lot of fear that there will be people will be forced somehow to or not be able to develop their land or do things with their land or things like that. But basically, there was a lot of concern that these outside experts had their own agenda. I have a feeling that people in the news media who deal with people from government all the time know when to be skeptical and know not. But I have a feeling that a lot of people who don't keep up on the news, don't read everything like most of us do, could easily be led to believe something like that. But there was a lot of emotion
So where does this stand now? Is it going to go forward, or
well,
is it just sort of the
here's what
stalemate, or-
happened is they came up with 5, I thought, very general and mild types of proposals that volunteers would work on. And I went to the last meeting, which was this week, basically to organize the volunteers into task force groups. And there was really nothing at this point, but there were some of the local opponents were there, but they didn't say anything. And then they broke up into groups. And I think that it's good in a way, because there might be people who are not who do not keep up on government, and they see government as, well, They're
The enemy?
overly suspicious, not,
Right.
not skeptical, but overly suspicious. So maybe I'm hoping that there'll be a lot of involvement by people who haven't been involved. And in government, I know the town plan is being revised, and there's going to be a lot of focus on that because it will have some of the state's goals are in town plans and regional plans for solar siting, wind siting, and where you can do that, and how to reduce emissions of fossil fuels over the next 50 years or so. And there are definitely goals there and those are being incorporated in town plans now. So Pownell is about to have its first couple of meetings on that revision. And so that should be interesting, I would say.
Well, speaking of solar, we have a couple of solar projects going on in Bennington right now. And Ed, I know you've written about them in the past. There's apparently two in Apple Hill development and
Sure.
Chelsea Hill, I think.
Sure. Those were two projects right next to each other.
This is just north of the interchange there at 279 and Route 7, right? Or right in that
Mental
area.
map going on. Yes.
That little hill there as you
Yes.
head down into Bennington if you're coming down from Manchester. So what's going on with that? I guess that's aroused a little bit of controversy down in Bennington.
Say the least. Well, Jim was the last reporter to.
But
You would know the
you
status
did the
better,
first
but
ones there, yeah.
I had been covering it for a while. But in brief, there was a lot of opposition to these two ground-mounted solar projects for a lot of reasons. It was near a lot of people's homes. It involved the clearing of land that people thought was significant. I can't remember how many acres it was. It was something like 10 acres of trees, if I remember correctly.
I think more even.
It might have been more.
Yeah.
Okay. But it was a lot of people saying, well, we're going to be cutting down trees to put up solar panels. That doesn't seem like it makes any sense. And then there was, the argument about aesthetics. People didn't want to look at it there. There's a lot of emotion there too, and a lot of people have a lot of love for I think the rolling hills of the Green Mountains, and really wanted to maintain that, really preserve that.
So have they come up with a new proposal to kind of give more screening or make the aesthetics of the project more palatable to folks?
The developers had put in new proposals sometime this summer, and they presented it to the public with some new screening that would have, I think, that they said would eliminate some of the issues that it could cause. But I can't actually remember what the most recent outcome of that was. There was a proposed offer or settlement, I think the word was $200,000 to the town of Bennington to let them build this.
Okay.
Well, to drop the opposition, I guess.
Yeah.
But there's, I think they added a lot wider buffer zones around three parts of the site at least. They made the solar site smaller, and I think they included non-glare and lower panels.
Oh, okay.
They did different things to do that. I don't think most of the opponents were buying it,
wasn't
but
quite
they
good enough.
they
I don't think it. Yeah, I
they
don't
definitely
think
they definitely didn't want the town to take the 200,000 and drop all opposition.
Mm.
But what the town decided to do was to reject the money, but to not pursue their first objection, which was that it was in the rural conservation district in the zoning, which town attorney thought might not be a good way to do that. There are other ones in that district. There are other panels in that district for other companies, and there are other reasons why they're going to monitor what goes on but they're not acting as an opponent on those grounds, at least. And the opponents, the neighbors, are still going to fight that.
It always amazes me how I don't think I've read about a single solar project that was like sort of greeted with applause and, you know, oh, this is going to be great. I mean, we live in a state that likes to think of ourselves as one of the more greener states around, and yet every large-scale solar project, and I can certainly understand if you're living next to it, maybe that's not what you want to look at every day, but it's amazing how those projects always seem to generate so much passionate opposition.
I think there's a lot of support and for roof solar panels
Right.
on roofs and also on brownfields too.
Yeah.
But from what I've heard with a lot of people, there's a frustration. Well, why isn't there like why isn't that happening more? And I don't know the answer to that. I mean, there's some complicated stuff there, I think, with
A lot of
tax credits and
Yeah,
economic
things that are
issues,
way
yeah.
up over here, but that's kind of part of our job is to find out why and explain it. I will say that my brief understanding is that Vermont and the Northeast and Massachusetts and New York are some of the more solar friendly than other parts of the country, including the Southwest, where
Right.
you'd think there would be more friendly and there would be more incentives for developers to build ground-mounted solar panels.
I think the Schumlin administration really pushed hard on that. I think that Scott administration seems to be trying to respond to citizen complaints because the ability to object to a plan was kind of limited for the local town or neighbors before the Public Service Board, now the
Have a little
Public
more.
Utility Commission now, but they're trying. I think the Scott administration is trying to give them more leeway to object, and the people are definitely
they're-
trying to.
Got to make use of that.
Yeah.
Well, we have a few minutes left, and then before we go, I just wanted to, mention the other kind of interesting story that both of us were following this week, Ed, and that's the resumption of bus service from
Yes.
3 stops in Manchester,
Yes.
Pretty good.
making a stop in
Yeah.
Bennington, and then
Yeah.
heading west to Albany, where the bus will drop off passengers at the Albany Rensselaer train station, the Albany bus terminal, and the Albany airport, which is actually in Colony.
Sure.
So that, I guess, is an idea that is probably going to take the place of, I know it was a long-term dream for many people to have direct passenger rail service come from Albany through Bennington to Manchester, and then farther north into Rutland and Burlington, I suppose. What do you think, what's been the reaction of Bennington on this?
Well,
I mean, up here, it's been kind
yeah.
of greeted with a lot of cheering because sounds great to be able to hop on a bus and get to the train station and
I think
vice
people
versa.
feel the same way. I think they feel that it is great. I think it's still a big sentiment of, gee, I really wish we had a train. I think a lot of people might prefer that over a bus, but at the same time, that's we don't know if that'll happen, and given how much the funding I think that would be needed, and the presidential administration, we don't know what they're gonna be. We don't know if they're gonna make that a priority. It kind of sounds like they might not. But I think I digress. So far, I think the response has been good. I think it's just another way to get there, and make transportation easier for a lot of people, so they don't need to use a car.
Yeah, well, I think for someone like living in New York City, where a lot of people don't own their own cars, to be able to take the train to Albany and then a bus up to Bennington or Manchester, it'll certainly be one more option. I think it'll be
Yep.
fascinating to see
That's
what
a
the
good
ridership
point.
turns out to be on the bus. I mean, it's in its early days now, and probably a lot of people still haven't heard of it, but it'll be interesting to see, especially with
Yeah.
October and fall foliage season coming up, height of the tourist season. If,
I think that's when
Yeah.
we're really going to see the benefits of that. I think once the momentum sort of builds, I've gotten the offer to actually. I really want to ride on it and try to talk to people and
Nice-looking
find
bus.
out. They do, yeah, it is, and it has Wi-Fi. It's
Yeah.
a luxury cruiser, but I really would like to take a ride on it and talk to people coming here and say why, what made you do this? Like, did
Sure.
you know about Bennington before? What are you going to do in
Excellent.
Bennington? And just get the story there.
all right, well, we'll look forward to hearing that account then of your
Yep.
blow-by-blow account of trip back and
Yeah,
forth.
the embedded journalist. Yeah.
Great. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. We could probably spend another half an hour talking about all these stories and more, but out of time for now. But I wanted to thank Jim Therian, Vermont Digger, Bennington Banner, Berkshire Eagle, Ed Damon, Bennington Banner, Berkshire Eagle. Great, great journalists, great colleagues. Good to have you both here today to talk about these and give us the backstory on all of this stuff. And also thank you folks for watching as well and for being with us today. We'll look forward to seeing you again the next time. We'll be doing a show on Press Pass. Until then, have a great day.